So hello everyone. Today we are again talking about Scrum related queries, and we have professional and she is willing to talk about some of the queries she has in mind, probably getting some interview questions also related to those areas. I'm not sure. Please go ahead, give us a little brief about you, and then we start talking about your queries.
Sure, thanks, Saket. So yeah, I'm working in one of the consulting firms, and I'm having overall experience of 8+ years.
Mhm.
But when we right. So but when we talk in sense of agile and Scrum, so I've recently started as a though I've worked as a agile member since I've joined my company and since I started my career, but as a Scrum master, I've recently started since 1 year.
Okay. Mhm, mhm.
Yeah, so as a fresher, you can say in this field, so I'm having bunch of many queries related to obviously to interviews that I give, but also mostly related to the kind of work which we are doing related to Scrum, and as a Scrum master, how I should deal the scenarios coming in daily routine work related,
Okay,
like
perfect. Yeah. So I will share my
yep,
idea. I don't say that my ideas are final ideas, but yeah, you can build on top of it, search a little bit more, but we explore together and see
definitely.
what we learn. Yeah. Go ahead. Go ahead with
Sure.
your queries. Yeah.
Okay. Sure. So, Saket, this I would like to go with first scenario-based questions that I face generally in my daily Scrum-related work. So, like first, I would go with like this. Always ask if you must have noticed with the client that okay, I understand that we understand that the Scrum is time boxed and every story will be delivered at the sprint end. But there's always ask that when any particular story can be completed to get in sort of ETA. He's always in a mind that what is the ETA, and so that like the UAT process or the production testing can be started, and they can put a milestone, okay, this is the date, and by when we can probably start our UAT testing or production testing. Though we are following agile, but little bit as people are more coming or transform from the waterfall to agile, so they're still having that mindset that what ETA can we get. So how should I
Okay.
deal with this? Because
So
every time I'm giving that sprint in. Yeah.
so
Please
what
go
we
on.
are understanding is that you have a bunch of work or a user stories which has been picked in a given sprint, and maybe stakeholder wants to know when these stories are going to finish. That's the thing.
Exactly.
And in
Yep.
usual circumstances, you can say we finish it at the end of the sprint because it's a part of the sprint goal, and that makes probably a good sense. Yeah. Now somebody may say,
Right.
okay, can I get a little insight about before that as well? Before the sprint finishes, do you have some estimate? You tell, in the first week or by this date, these stories are done. And if yes, how do we do that? Yeah, that's the question.
Exactly. Yeah.
So
Right.
see, usually when people are working in a Scrum context, usually they majorly focus on time boxing of an iteration, and iteration takes care of their complete working usually. And maybe it's a very rare to have a need of some milestones or forecast which are inside the iteration. It's usually the way it works. But if your work is little bit predicted and it's kind of things which are coming in a small pieces, and they comes and get done and get delivered, and someone is always expecting an answer. So it is more near to the Kanban way of working rather than time boxed sprint way of working. But based, if that is the case, then probably we need to see that do we really need to use time boxing, or like if I am estimating something in between as well, then probably why do I do a time box? I probably just live with that. Yeah, that's a one
Right.
possibility. And the Kanban way of working may focus on that. We may not even do a time boxing. We have a flow based process. And in the Kanban way of working, we can estimate the lead time or the time historically it has been taken before from the point you pick up the item into doing things development, and by the time it get finished into the deployment. So you may have a data which shows, or you can capture that data, the movement of work from a stage where people start working, and from that point how much time does it take to get it delivered. And if you have that information based on your historical data, then you probably know what is the estimated start date of that particular work, and then how many days it will take before it will get deployed. So you may have a 3-4 days of time, and that data is coming based on historical information. You are not just guessing it, you are also validating it, and that can start making people clear that, yeah, I know these are the 5 things getting done in this particular iteration. this is the estimated start date of it. And based on the estimated start date of it, I can find out when it is going to finish estimatedly.
Okay, so suppose in case we are building a project from scratch and is a very new project, so in that case we can guess estimate for the very first sprint. That can we do that? Like suppose for the first sprint we deliver for first two sprints. After first two sprints we have planned UAT or something. So for that we don't have any historical data, right? So but over there we have to guess estimate a little bit.
So it's like this.
Like what I
If
think.
someone is working on a purely new product or a new project, then story level estimation to complete or estimated date may not make much sense. What the person will do with it, because they are not able to consume it. Usually a story level ETA will make sense when your product is already live, and as soon as you finish it, someone is willing to use it. That's why they want to know in tomorrow or day after when I am getting it. So I solve my business problem. That's a usual thing. Yeah. Story level estimation. But when you are in a new product space, when you are working initially in the project duration, then you better focus on time boxing and may not get into the details of inside of time boxing. And yes, you can pick up the work for initial 1 or 2 iteration. You can do first level release planning. And based on the amount of certainty and information you have, you will have a variability in your release planning, which means that if you have less understanding about the product, less understanding about people, less understanding about technology, the projections may go a little more wrong. But if you have fair understanding about technology, people are very much aware what they are doing, they have done this work, maybe not here, but somewhere else, then even in the new space, you might have a better forecast. So that might be a function of how much we know and how much clarity we have. And based on that, we refine as we go along.
Okay. So I got it. I got the rough idea of it. Okay. So in extension to this question, like, can we do Saket, like the forecasting of the stories in for the future? Suppose my project is going to get live. I've started in August 22, and can I give a date as where it can be ended, like in 23 or something? So that forecasting, if we want to do so, how we should proceed with it?
So first thing is that amount of forecast will be always needed if you're working in a projectized mode, because stakeholder wants to know that, okay, what is the timelines? What are we dealing with? How much money we have to spend overall? At the same time, it might not be a forecast for each and every story or a feature, because the expectation here is you don't even know what all stories will come and what all stories will get deleted. So if you have 100 understanding of features, you can't tell that this work will get done on that particular date. If you can do it, then probably you may not need to use agile way of working or scrum way of working. You better focus on predictive way of working, which is also a good way of working. It is always useful to follow predictive life cycle when you have a predictability of a requirement. So when you have a predictability of requirement, use predictive life cycle and give them a predictability of finishing date. Even in that case also, there will be some amount of variability, but you will do a forecast. You will tell that, okay, we have 20 items. This is my critical path. This is how we are going to work on it. And this is how we are going to deliver it. So there will be a milestones which gives some information. Now, in a predictive way, waterfallish way, that information or that forecast may be true around 20%. There will be a variances because things will change. Yeah, that's kind of a variances are expected to come. Now, if you are doing in the agile way of working or a scrum way of working, then these ideas are initial ideas. They are rough ideas. The real requirement will emerge. The detailing of requirement is expected to happen. We don't know how deep a particular requirement is. And that's why we want to elaborate it as we go along. But even with that, just high level information, we need to make a forecast. When are we going to do it? So we usually use a term called roadmap, and we forecast the milestones that, okay, this is how a big chunk of features will go should here, not at a user story level or a feature level, but some kind of a milestone, which may be like foundational functionality will be done, which we call it version 1.0. Then there will be a version 1.5, which will have foundational plus extra functionality 1. Then we will have version 2.0, which will have extra 2, 3, 4. And we are expecting 6 months foundation, extra 9 months, and final 12 months. So you give that kind of a roadmap which is needed. But The variability of the content will be more higher, because in the predictive way, you may have a 20% error. In the adaptive or agile way, since the requirements are emerging, since you are knowing things as you go along, the variability may be more. And sometimes people may want to keep the timeline same. Maybe the scope gets changed, or maybe the timeline gets changed because we want to have a foundational functionality finished before we can make the release. So we can say that, yes, we should have some exercise to come up with the roadmap. Or if you are using a predictive life cycle to create a whole project plan, and depending upon the amount of requirement you have, the certainty in the requirement, both of these things will have their own variabilities.
Sure, makes sense. Makes sense. So, and in a nutshell, we have to keep in mind the uncertainty in mind, like what dependencies can come in the future. That's what we have adopted Agile for, right?
Yeah. So
Okay.
it is like new features, new customer learning. So we don't know exactly. If we know exactly what we
Right.
really want to do, then better we follow predictive lifecycle. There is no problem with that. We don't unnecessarily have to use agile way of working if we know what we have to do it. So it might be a little hybrid. Sometimes people want to say, we want to execute every iteration, but requirements are fixed. You can say, okay, this is a hybrid. We have a fixed requirement. Let's do an estimation for all the requirements and have a forecast, and then we will do an iterative development. But that's not an agile way of working. It's a hybrid way of working. Might be needed in some situations, but that's what it is. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Thanks, Saket. Okay, so coming now to next question, it's somewhat related to Scrum process that I have observed. So I would like to quote one case over here. Suppose we are doing a project of some data ingestion using big data technology, and we are getting data at a very real time scenario. It's maybe incremental format, like it's some date can come and some date cannot come. So how we should proceed with the definition of ready for such stories? Because till now what we do, we create a story for ingesting suppose 10 tables data, and suppose for 9 tables the data has come up in sprint of 2 weeks, but for one table it's still pending, and the development team or the testing team couldn't proceed with the validation of that particular table. Why? Because the data hasn't come. So definition of ready, we can't say that we couldn't pick up that story, because it's very real time, because we have to observe that when the data is coming in, only then the work can be proceeded. But we can't wait also, like when we should pick up that story in a sprint. So yeah.
So what I am understanding is, why do you
Mm-hmm.
need to follow sprint here if that is the situation?
Okay.
Yeah. So first, let's understand what is sprint and Scrum, and what is the challenge here, and what situation you have. So Scrum way of
Right.
working, the assumption or a way of working is, we have a fair amount of clarity of a given time box. So whatever the time box is, it could be a 1 week, it could be a 2 weeks. We understand what we are expected to do. And for that given time box, we want to have a sufficient amount of certainty. And in order to ensure whatever we are planning for that particular duration, we should be able to meet it. Yeah. Now, you may have something called definition of ready, you may not have it. The purpose of definition of ready is to facilitate that how can team make a reliable forecast for a given sprint duration. Yeah. In the absence of
Right.
unreliable requirements which might be coming, in the absence of uncertainty, team making commitment for a given sprint, they will end up not meeting it. Yeah, that's the whole thing. So how can we avoid that? Even if we don't have a definition of ready, but how do I commit to my work when my work is not certain to come to me? Yeah, that's a one thing. Now, if you are in a situation where work may come, may not come, if comes, then you have to do it. If doesn't come, you may need to do something else. Then how can I plan my week? Yeah. So that is becoming little tricky. Probably the Scrum way of working may be not needed. You may focus on little flow way of working, where you prioritize the work on a daily basis or alternate day basis, and see what information we have today. And based on today, we'll decide what we'll do next. And whenever the information is available, we change. Yeah. So in that case, you are not doing sprint planning for a whole week. You might be doing your planning for every other day or every alternate day, and figuring out what should be done and what should not be done. And that's how you move forward. So Scrum way of working, you have a goal to set, you work on that particular goal, and then you demonstrate to people, they give you a feedback, and on the basis of a feedback, you correct that path. The flow way of working, you have uncertainty of arrival of work, but once the work arrives, you know what has to be done. There is no much uncertainty or a much complication need. People can have a quick discussion and they can figure it out what they have to do. They don't need a big meeting to find out what to do, and they know how it goes. And as soon as it finishes, they probably can deliver it, maybe not even require a demo. And as one part gets done, it gets delivered, and then you move to the second part. If one part takes 2 more days, it takes 2 more days. If one part get finished by a week, it's good. It finished by a week. So that's the flow way of working.
Okay, thanks. I was actually looking for such kind of advice. Yeah. Okay. So the next question is like it's again related to a scenario only, real time scenario, that suppose my work is of 2 week sprint, and we have taken a bunch of stories, but in the middle of the sprint, like we are getting so many bug related kind of work, like so many UAT bugs or production bugs. So how you suggested, how should we deal it? Should we create some separate board like Kanban or something to deal such kind of work, or should we add such bugs to the current stories? Because it then, what I think personally, like it may hamper the current sprint goal, right? So how we should proceed?
So this problem is a problem, and it has a few patterns how which people resolve. But exactly what will work for you, you will figure it out based on what is the quantum of defects, what is the quantum of variability, and what is the criticality of your current sprint commitment. So it has a multiple dimensions to it. But one simple pattern is that when you are planning your sprint, you reserve some capacity for such kind of ad hoc request. And you can say that part is not planned in the sprint. So say you have 100 points capacity, but you only plan for 60. And for the remaining 40, you keep waiting for these kind of work. And these kind of work, which is coming for the 40 area, may be managed with the help of visual Kanban flow, which may not, because you can't do a sprint planning for them in advance. They come and go, and you have a flow to handle that. So that's the one possibility. The another possibility sometimes is that you split your team into the development of a next sprint and supporting of the previous lead done work. So in that case, that particular team may be focusing on Kanban way of working or whatever is suitable. And then other teams are focusing, other part of the team is focusing on delivering the current sprint goal. Again, in this also splitting of a capacity happening, but sometime separating the team, sometime maybe keeping the team same. Inside the team itself, we identify 2 guys who will take the defect as a priority, and they are not loaded much in a given sprint. Whenever something comes in, they are the one who are troubleshooter, others focus on their work. And this troubleshooter's responsibility can be rotated, not necessary that I remain troubleshooter for all the time. Maybe in the next month, someone else become the troubleshooter. So it could be a rotating role, it could be a dedicated team, it could be a capacity reserved, and we can figure it out who does it once that particular thing comes in. And we need to see, as per our technology and people skills composition, which might be a suitable thing for us.
Okay. So in relation to this, what I have seen, one of my Scrum teams, that the Scrum Master was keeping an ad hoc bucket of maybe suppose X story points for such kind of work. But I discussed this thing with him. So because you see, if you keep an ad hoc bucket of 4 story point or 5 story point for such random work, and suppose you're not getting that kind of work, so again it will show you on your board as a spill, right? Which is not a good pattern with every sprint. So yeah, right. So like you said, for the capacity planning we can go with, and we can keep some percentage of capacity as planned for that such kind of work, right?
Something like that, more or less. And then we retrospect, you may have a forecast of it.
Yes.
And again, not all defects are of the same priority. You may have a
Exactly.
different rule for the things which has to be taken care immediately, and there are others which can wait for next sprint, where you can go for a little bit more planned. By the time you are planning the next sprint, that these are the defects also need to be taken care. So there could be planning for that. Yeah.
Okay. Thanks, Saket. Okay, so in relation to this again, to the capacity planning. So suppose we are doing our sprint planning. So can I say this statement? Will that be fair? Like my velocity and capacity planning go hand in hand when we do the sprint planning. Because suppose my team member is giving story point to a particular story XYZ with some X number of story points. So can I ask my team member at the time of sprint planning exactly to give some estimated hours to the task of that particular story, so that I can keep the capacity planning in my capacity tracker also updated, so that we don't exceed our capacity for any particular given sprint? So can
So
that be a better
it's
approach?
usually a matter of a practice and the team maturity. There is no
Mhm.
universal thing. Yeah, from Scrum perspective, they are very much happy team doing estimation in efforts and hours while doing sprint planning, so that we know how well we are planning our work, because that is what we call it commitment driven planning. And in the commitment driven planning, the some amount of estimation of the efforts are expected to be planned rather than focusing on velocity number. Velocity driven plannings are good for long duration planning, where you are thinking of, we have a 3 sprints to do, this is our historical velocity, and this is how we probably can forecast that these number of stories will get done. But for your current sprint, you need to see the current situation rather than just looking at a story point number. You may end up planning more, you may end up planning less. That's a recommendation from Scrum way of working. Now, capacity and velocity all is expected to correlate at some extent, but not necessarily always. So say you may have a poor velocity because of the lot of technical defects or say depths you have, which are making things slow. Yeah, so even if you have 100 hours available, but doing one thing used to take 10 minutes before, but now it takes 1 hour because there are complications to integrate and do things. So my velocity is going down because the system is becoming complex, though my allocated capacity for my team remains more or less the same. That could be a negative side. And there could be a positive side also, where you initially was having a lot of learning curve. Now you have learned and you have a lot of reusability. Whenever some new things comes in, we can reuse the code which we already have made. We can quickly assemble that and make it run. So if we have that, then our velocity may start increasing even with the same capacity. So I may have 5 people from the beginning of the year and they may remain 5 till the end of the year. My capacity is more or less frozen, but my velocity may keep fluctuating. And sometimes because of various reasons, it may go up and down. Yeah. So, but again, we can have some kind of a
Mhm.
range where it will say, if I add the
Yes.
6th person, then how it is going to increase or decrease. Yeah.
Okay, okay, sure. Thank you. So, I've given a few of the interviews. So, this was the next question is was asked in that interview. Like it was a scenario based again. So, suppose even after a lot of discussion in any particular sprint planning, any two members or more are not reaching to a conclusion. So, how many story points should be there for any particular story? So how you should deal it? So maybe like people say that we should ask the member what complexity or dependency or risk they see in particular story, but even after so many conversations and one or two three rounds and not reaching, so how we should deal with that story? Should we
So
keep back to the backlog for more refinement? Mm-hmm.
So it is something that as a leader, I need to have an agreement with the team. So what is there? It's a matter or it's a process of decision making. So we are saying the consensus decision making is always preferred for anything. You can say, should we meet for a daily scrum at 9 a.m. or should we meet at 11 a.m. or should we meet at 2 p.m.? Yeah, that could be a
Right.
discussion, and there could be a never-ending discussion also around that. So how do we take that particular discussion and decisions? So we may have a team level rule. So as a Scrum Master, I can facilitate making those working agreement or a team charter where we have a clarity that how do we make decisions when the consensus are not reached. Yeah. So there is a
Okay.
possibility we may have a rule that when consensus are not reaching, we will go with the majority number. Or we may have a consensus or an agreement on the rule. Whenever the consensus are not reaching, we may go with the maximum number in case of a story points. Yeah. Or we may take an expert advice and we'll go with an expert opinion, whatever it is. So as a team, we need to have an agreement. How do we resolve a estimation problem when we don't have a consensus? Yeah, we may try to do 2 rounds of discussion, but even after 2 rounds of discussion, if we don't have a consensus, how do we put a number to it? We should have an agreement for that. The voting and majority vote could be a
Okay,
one
we should
rule.
quit beforehand.
What?
Mm-hmm. Okay, got it, got it. Okay, so my next question is like again it was an interview question. So suppose my product owner is not available even after doing one-to-one connects, and it actually happened with me, and even after so many conversations, so he is little bit reluctant in coming to the sprint planning or backlog refinement, particularly in backlog refinement meetings. So how should we proceed with this scenario?
So we are not clear in that case that what is the whole context. See, one thing we need to understand is from a Scrum perspective, Product owner is the one who is responsible for the return of the team's time. So if I am not giving you the work and you are doing whatever comes in your mind, I am the one who is losing, because you are ultimately spending my energy and my time. You decide whatever you want to do, ultimately I have to suffer. So if I don't care whatever you are doing, then we have an issue. Maybe that person is not a product owner, or something else is needed, or that project itself is not needed. Yeah, that's a possibility. So we need to understand what is the whole context. Now, there could be a context where product owner may think, I have already given you all the requirements. Now you have crystal clear requirements. I just need that. And I don't want to talk much about it further. Yeah. So that could be a possibility. And the person may just want to see those details. Now, if that is the case, that is the case where product owner is not willing, or a person who is giving you the requirement is not willing to elaborate the requirement, but is willing to give you a requirement at a level which he feels is good enough. Yeah, that could be a possible case. Now, when you have that possible case, then you need to figure it out a working agreement. Okay, if you can't elaborate it, who is the one who you can trust, who understand what is the insight which you have around it, and that particular person should be able to elaborate it. It could be a team member only, but how do you revalidate back that he or she has done it as per your expectation? Yeah. So we need to come up with that working agreement, because ultimately either the requirements are well understood and we are unnecessarily making that guy to create a user story out of it, and that's why the person may not feel any value, or there could be some other case. So we need to understand what is happening, and based on that we come up with a working agreement. But yes, I do see in most of the job interviews, working with the product owner or even job vacancies seems to be the key skill which is asked from the Scrum Master, because I feel a lot of time it is challenging to have that working agreement and work accordingly. But we need to give some examples and probably share that these are the things which we have done in the past, and this is how we have worked as an agreement with those stakeholders, sometime by supporting those people with the help of our team member. Maybe you have a person who is doing quality work, test work, and he or she may start associating with that guy, and that person start elaborating user stories and acceptance criteria, and may take internal approval or internal review from that particular person. And ultimately the ownership remains with product owner, but we have a team member supporting writing and elaborating user story from Scrum scheme of work. This is perfectly fine. The Scrum has no problem with it. That person could be anyone. That person could be Scrum Master. That person could be developer. That person could be a business analyst. That person could be a tester, whatever. For Scrum, it's a team member. Ultimately, the person is supporting the product owner to facilitate and write the user story. Scrum never insists that product owner must type the user story, must write the user story. There is nothing like that. They insist the product owner must own the user story. It should not happen. These guys start making whatever they feel right, and then we are in a mess.
Okay. So someone has to pitch in between in that case, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
If that's the situation. If that's the situation.
Yes, right. Okay. So my next question, Saket, is related to metrics. So it was a question that someone asked, like we see the burn down chart and the burn up chart. So suppose if we take example of burn down chart, we shows like the remaining work we are left with. So on that basis, is it a fair statement to say that should we judge the team performance also? Like suppose is it underperforming or overperforming? Like in many videos, in many articles, we have seen that if the line is below and we can it is underperforming, or above it is overestimating. So will that be fair to say?
So what is the idea here is we are taking this burn down chart as a feedback. Yeah, as a feedback, so that we do something about it. Yeah. So it's again that if something is working poor than what we expected, it's a knowledge, it's the information to us. Now we need to do something about it. Now, is it that we just say, yeah, the team is poor performing? Okay, what do you get out of it? Nothing. Yeah. Or you can say, the environment is bad, or the product owner is not giving the requirement. That is not the purpose. So what is the purpose is we learn that looks like this sprint is getting messy because we are behind our expected performance. So we are definitely behind our expected performance. Now, it is not necessary that we are behind against some benchmark. There is no benchmark. It's not a benchmark which we believe the team must have performed like this. It's a benchmark which we created ourselves in our sprint planning meeting. But it's a benchmark which is created by us, and we are measuring against that so that we can correct and find out where should we fix our problems. So it's a feedback. Rather than using a word monitoring, we better use the word feedback. It feedback for everyone. It feedback for Scrum Master also, how probably there could be some impediments which are blocking the whole flow. Yeah. So how can I possibly remove those impediments or maybe improve the planning process? We might have planned our sprint too aggressively. Looks like this was not a possible the way we have planned it here. So one sprint having poor or issues in a burn down chart, no problem. Two sprints still having a problem, maybe a little bit problem. But if you have a 3-4 sprints and still the problem persists, then there is definitely a problem. So we are getting a feedback 1, feedback 2, feedback 3, feedback 4, and still we are unable to fix it. Then definitely it's a poor performance by the whole team. Yeah. And especially the Scrum Master, yeah, because it's been a 4 iteration. But if it's a problem which is happening in a first or second iteration, yes, it's a feedback and we have to do something about it.
Okay, so I guess I've answered it right, because just to add on what I answered, like as we say that Scrum is totally based on inspect and adapt. So it's not just we can say that one down is just for to leadership as the audience to say or judge the performance of any particular team. It's just an ongoing process within a particular sprint, and we should see and like you said, to get a feedback out of it, like how the are we lagging or are we doing the work on track. So if we're lagging, so we should cope it up. Yeah, okay, perfect. So thank you. Okay, so next question, it was came like related to Scrum-ban. So it was asked that we have worked on Scrum and we have worked on Kanban. So can you relate me an example, please, so that where this Scrum-ban can be used? So yeah.
So I think this may not have any standard answer. You may just need to see
Yeah.
your example, and probably the example you were talking about that we were focusing on development as well as bug fixing. So we were focusing on using both the methods for different way of working, and we want to ensure that we have a visibility of what is happening. And we were also applying limiting work in progress for a defect work as well as for our Scrum work. So a thing which you did or which you have where you have both type of work happening, you might be able to use some terminology and say, this was our Scrum-ban approach. Yeah, that's something one can say. As much I understand, there is no very defined line which says this should be called Scrum-ban and this should be called Scrum, or this should be called Kanban. In general, in the Kanban also, you can use time boxing and you can fairly call it just Kanban. In a Scrum also, it is always open to use the Kanban boards. You can put limiting work in progress as well. Usually people use Scrum board and they don't put WIP into it. Work in progress is not limited. But if you start limiting work in progress, you are using Kanban as well. And most of the team nowadays using some amount of Kanban in the Scrum. So it depends upon how people label it, I would say, but yeah.
Okay. Okay. So here goes my last question is related to, like you said, the WIP limit, right? So is there any like rule of thumb to set the WIP limit, or how we should proceed with setting the WIP limit in any Kanban board?
So the formula for a WIP limit calculation should be dependent by the team experiments. So we need to see,
okay.
And again, we may need to put a story, yeah, rather than saying that this is how it is working. So what is the essence? Why do we want to put a WIP limit? The idea of putting a WIP limit is to improve your lead time. Yeah. So it's like this. Say you have a restaurant and you don't want to have more than X number of people entering into the restaurant, because if that happens, the quality of the people who are getting served inside the restaurant will go down. First, and second, the time it takes to finish a one particular order will increase. Yeah, it will become chaotic. So you want to ensure the number of staff you have, the space you have, as per that, you want to create sufficient amount of seating arrangement. You may be able to add more chairs to it, but you don't want to add those chairs because you can fill all the space you have in the restaurant, but you don't want to because you need to also think of the other services. So you think of that, okay, on average, I believe if someone goes to my restaurant, 20 to 25 minutes, the order should be good enough. Yeah, time take to eat the food. Whenever they order the food, we should be able to give the food in 15 to 20 minutes time. Yeah. So looking at your time you expect your visitor to stay in the restaurant, the time you expect them to get their order, you define your work in progress limit. You limit the number of chairs, you design the seating arrangement, and you put it that, okay, these are the number of people who will sit it. Now, in future, if you see the performance is going down, you are getting a lot of complaint, you may need to remove some seats. Or you may see the performance is good, and there are some areas where you see an opportunity to add more seats. You can say, let's add more seats because we can increase our work in progress limits. Now, in the IT space, sometimes it becomes a little tricky, because in the physical space, it is very easy to see what is working and what is not working. But more or less, the concept remains the same. We need to see, we have an arrival of a work and we have a departure of the work. So from the time the work gets started and the time work gets finished, we want to identify how much time it should take. What should be the ideal expected level from the customer? Again, they may want to have in a 10 minutes, they may want to have in 10 days, but what is the one which is good enough as per our capacity, as per our customer expectation management? And based on that, we need to load our restaurant, which is our development team. If our restaurant is too loaded, then people will not have time to take care of contingencies and support an ongoing order, because everybody is busy and there are some orders which are lying here and there. But if our restaurant has a space, then we can take care of the order frequently. We can let it move forward. So in order to arrive to a work in progress limit, I need to look at my capacity, what number of the development resource or whatever the infrastructure, what type of thing and team I have. So I need to look at my capacity, and I need to see, based on my current capacity, what has been the historical flow, how much time it has been taking to my capacity to move forward and finish the work, and is it an acceptable time? And based on that, I need to play with limiting work in progress. Now, if I have a very stringent WIP limit, means the WIPs are very small, then there could be a situation some people may not have a work, like a restaurant. If I only let few customers sit in the restaurant, I may have a few staff which doesn't have a work, because there is enough chill in the restaurant. But if I have a too much work in progress limit, then we may have people who are sitting in the restaurant and not getting served. So I need to take care of both. I need to ensure that my worker is also not sitting, and I also need to make sure my customer is also not sitting, work is also not sitting and there. So we need to figure that out, a balance. So you may want to keep, and sometimes you have a priority on worker utilization, sometimes you have a priority on work movement. So the critical services will have people who may still have a time and they want to keep a WIP less. For services which are not that critical, you may focus more on utilization of your people, and you may keep a high WIP limits there. So it's an experiment based on the lead time you are anticipating, and based on that you create. To start with, it could be a function of number of people you have in the team multiplied by something. Usually people start the number of developers multiplied by 2 becomes your WIP limit. Sometimes people use number of developers multiplied by 1.5 becomes your WIP limit for at that particular stage. It's a good starting point. And then we start calculating that, okay, how it is impacting my lead times.
Okay. Thanks, Saket. Great. So yeah, I was having many questions and scenarios, obviously. So yeah, that was a great session to get it answered by some expert advice.
Perfect. Yes. And just work with them, do your own research. And if you have something follow up, we can do some conversation later as well. Yeah.
Yeah, I hope so. Yeah, sure.
Perfect. Yeah. Bye.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. Yeah, bye. Take care. Yeah, thank you.